Hi, I'm Counselor Dr. Greg Jantz. Grief comes in many different forms. A loss can be a painful event that takes you in a direction you never thought you'd go. How to deal with what grief and loss can do to us. Next.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
The word grief, the word loss, not fun words. They're not words you want to hear. They're not situations you want to deal with. But as a human being, we are going to have times of significant loss. As a counselor, one of the things that I've seen over the last 40 years, my goodness, it's been 40 years, is that loss, and when we experience loss, we experience grief. And there's been different stages of grief. I have a list here. Different researchers have said you go through this, and then you go through this, and then you got to get to this place for healing. And we'll look at some of that. But we also want to look at there is a grief that is complicated. There's a grief that it's hard to recover. If you've lost a loved one to suicide, you are always in the what if I would have, and how do we come to a place of recovery? Grief can be complicated. The loss of a job, a layoff when you were told that everything was secure, a loss, sudden loss of a loved one in an automobile accident. Loss comes in many different forms, but we always will experience grief. And we use the traditional list here. Grief. First thing you hit you is shock. Unbelievable shock. It is that flush through your body. You are stunned. You are at a place where you just cannot even imagine what happened, because it seems at times so unbelievable. So it's shock and disbelief. And we can be in that stage for a while. And in that stage, it's like, no, I'm going to wake up. I'm going to wake up and everything is going to be okay. I know it's going to be okay. And that's what we tell ourselves. Sometimes this is a short stage. Other times it gets rushed even more because people are coming to us with questions and we're still in shock. People don't know what to say. Sometimes people say things that are hard to understand. I have a loved one who lost a parent at a very 11 years old, and recalls to this day somebody coming up and saying, God must believe you're really special if he was to take your mom, since he took your mom. People say things that can amplify the emotions of grief. You see, because from all that stun, you may go into the next stage of anger, sadness, and I think sometimes the word rage, where we rage against others, we rage against the situation, we place blame. Now, by the way, these are all natural things that we're going to go through. If you're fired from a job, you're going to blame somebody who did something that undermined you. If you had a sudden, unexpected loss, you said goodbye to a loved one in the morning, they never came home later that night. It's beyond unbelievable, but we look to put blame somewhere. And that blame somewhere is oftentimes misplaced, but it's what we feel like doing. So, shock, disbelief, anger is number 2. And as we look at this, these are the typical stages of grief that are the most common described by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she was an individual that really coined this process and these terms. Bargaining. If I do this, maybe they'll come back. If I plead with God a certain way, they'll come back. If I go in and speak with my boss and bargain, I'll have my job back. All kinds of bargaining. You may lay there in bed at night and it's racing through your mind, all the different things you're going to bargain with, and you're really not sleeping, but in the morning you're up and you're ready to bargain. Bargaining, it doesn't bring back the person. Bargaining doesn't resolve the shock, the disbelief, the anger. And it tends to come in waves. And the next one is depression. And depression, and I've written several books on depression. I talk about the effects of grief and loss in my book, Healing Depression for Life, because you can get locked into depression. And it can be very deep and very dark. That's a dark, dark depression. And by depression, I mean it is like on you. No matter what you do, you can't shake it off. And this is a point where you're taking prescription drugs, you're misusing, you may be drinking, you may be using illicit drugs, you may be escaping in many different ways because you want to mood elevate. You want to change how you're feeling. And it's particularly if you've struggled with addiction in the past, can be a vulnerability here where it's so easy to go back to that addiction. The other, by the way, this depression can last years and years. You can feel, I'm not motivated to do anything. You stop self-care. You stop taking care of where you live. When I say self-care, your hygiene, you don't care. You may find yourself isolating, withdrawing from others, and you will have periods of great anger, rage, sadness. The waves just keep coming and coming. And that depression can be severe enough where you may even feel like taking your own life. You may feel like, I cannot function like this anymore, and you start to entertain thoughts of taking your life and suicide. And I just want to acknowledge it's a very black and desperate time. It's a deep darkness. And then finally, we're told we're supposed to come to a place of acceptance. And acceptance simply means, well, this happened, and I'm got to go on with my life. I'm going to get out of this hole I've created, and I'm going to live and go on. You may not be happy, but it's like I come to a place, I'm accepting what happened, and I am just going to live my life and try to function. So acceptance doesn't mean I've come to a place of peace. Acceptance does not mean that I'm okay. And we've got to move beyond acceptance. We move from acceptance into a stage of healing, recovery, and some of the things we have to deal with is forgiveness. We've got to deal with that deep despondency. And this is where we're asking for help. This is where we're not alone. And this is where I'm in a group, grief and loss group. I'm getting help for depression. Sometimes I need more intensive help. I'm being honest. I'm not escaping through addiction. And so this is what we're talking about. Now, here's some things to look for and I've made some notes here. Look for physical changes. If you lack energy, and that's a big one, no energy to do anything. If you lack, written down, loss of appetite. It's like, I don't feel like eating, don't have an appetite anymore. I don't even know if I am hungry. You may feel a great amount of tension in your body. Oh man, just a heavy tension. You may notice a lot of digestive issues, but your body physically, maybe it's headaches, it's aches and pains. Your body physically is crying out. It is crying out deeply. And you may notice like blood pressure issues, things that you didn't have before. It's like, now I've got these physical issues. Because grief and loss can be internalized. It's going to go somewhere. And so it can be internalized. And our body starts to carry all of it. And we're carrying in our body, we're carrying the trauma of the loss. Again, a loss of a loved one, loss of a job, I'm just using those two examples, can have very similar effects on us physically. Okay? There are different impacts of losing a job versus losing a loved one, different impacts in our life. But the experience physiologically, the experience in our body can be very much the same. All right, behavioral changes. You may feel a lot of just, irritability, frustration, irritability, frustration. It just doesn't go away. You may notice intense anger episodes. You may find flashbacks, and I'm thinking of everything that ever happened in the past. And maybe it's with a keen sense of memory. I am thinking about everything that's happened. And I can remember everything, every wrong that was done to me. And this is a dangerous place to be, because now I can easily take up offenses. I'm taking up an offense to somebody doesn't look at me right. Somebody didn't say something quite right, or I misinterpreted. I can be such a nitpick about everybody and everything. So in essence, nobody can do anything right. And I develop what I call a spirit of criticism. Super critical spirit of everybody and anything. Nobody's really good enough. Everybody's failed you. And you're falling from that spirit of criticism, you're falling into that blame and attack mode. You're blaming everybody for everything. So that's one of the behavioral changes. Behaviorally, you might notice you can't sleep, or you're having traumatic, intense dreams. Sometimes people will sleep more. They escape through sleep. Other times it's less. Not having a good ability to concentrate as well. I can't focus. I can't bring my mind to think around anything. And so that's another one to be aware of. Okay, emotional changes. 3 areas: physical changes, behavioral changes, and emotional changes. A feeling of hopelessness, absolute hopelessness. And the hopelessness is on that edge of despair. There's no hope for my future. If there's no hope for my future, then what happens? Then I feel like it's not worth living. I feel hopeless, helpless, despair, despondency, thinking about death. And so watch for this one. There can be so much. You're going to struggle with anger, fear, and guilt. Anger, frustrations, rage, hurt, fear, lots of anxiety, lots of self-doubt, lots of worry. You're riddled. The fear just gets a stronghold on your life, just grabs you. And that's a big one. We also know that you may feel a lot of guilt. And just guilt. And by guilt, we might want to use the word shame. You feel ashamed. You feel shameful. And you don't feel like something's wrong with you, terribly wrong with you. God doesn't love me. If God loved me, this wouldn't happen. You feel shame. I've ruined myself. So I wanted to address this with you. And one of the things I want to address is we can't let this stronghold of these lies take hold and take us down a unhealthy path of self-destruction. Addiction may increase. Addiction may intensify. Escapism behaviors. You're floating in a despondency. You may have such high temptations to do reckless behaviors. Again, this all goes back to a complicated grief, loss. It's a situation that is so overwhelmingly painful, we don't know where to put the emotions. All right. Abandonment, you may feel like people are just the next person, you're going to lose the next person. You lost somebody you loved. Now you're afraid you're going to lose another person. And you may really struggle with that abandonment. One of the things that happens is there's days that you may feel like, oh, wait, I feel okay. And there's other days, I'm not okay. I am not okay. And it is terrible. And this is where I may act out. I may do things that are beyond reckless. So, because I no longer care, and I start to devalue my life. Okay? Look for resentment. I begin to resent people. If I'm blaming somebody for a loss of job, a loss of a loved one, a doctor, if it's a car wreck, I'm blaming the other person. And that blame turns into a deep resentment. And resentment is a significant poison. And that resentment poison will get into your life. And it's hard to have any healthy relationships. You won't trust. You can't be emotionally close to somebody. You feel like God has rejected you, doesn't love you. You don't believe in God. All these types of things. Now, I do want to mention there is a point where we have to make a decision. Okay, I have to move beyond my despair of all the loss and the emotions that are all packed into grief. Now, through the years, and this really is the 40th year here at the Center, a Place of Hope, grief and loss can be a huge stumbling point because this is where we start to do things that are self-destructive to ourselves. And then we end up with more regret. And sometimes we wait a long time to get help. My encouragement is, hey, if I've had significant loss, I want to be working with somebody in my life that believes in my ability to get well, get strong again, and that will help me use this trauma I've been through, help me to be able to turn trauma and really walk in triumph. And yeah, I'm using the word triumph. We can walk in triumph. The trauma is always there, but here's the key. It does not control our lives. And you will start to know in small ways, healing starting to happen. You may notice, oh, my sense of humor. I laughed at something. We go, all right, I smiled. And you start to see things you haven't seen in a long time. But we do need somebody to help us gently dive in and deal with resentment, unforgiveness, and help us rediscover who we are and our gifts and our talents, and where you move from self-absorbed now, and that's a normal place to be, self-absorbed with all the toxic emotions. I move from self-absorbed to self-directed, and I am self-accepting, and now I am ready to be of service and help to others. So some call that the reconstruction stage. But I like to say this is the rebuilding of hope in my life. Hope tends to come back when we feel like there's a plan. And a plan for hope means I have to resolve the hurt. I never forget it. It's like you've seen people who have had a tragic event in their life and significant loss. And what happened? They actually eventually went on to help a lot of people and to be a walking example of healing. But did they ever forget what happened? No. They may even tell the story, but it's not affecting them in the same way. It is not taking them down a path of self-destruction. They are empowered to be of help to others. So I know this really can be done because I've seen it done so many times. How long does it take? Well, when we're at that point of misery where we say, I am willing to do anything and everything. When you come to that point, that's the point of healing. That's the point of I'm going to move forward and I have to make a decision. I'm no longer going to live in misery. And I have to get help for the depression. I have to get help for the anxiety. If I've got an addiction going there, kind of in the background, I've got to deal with that. So when to know to get professional help? If I'm still dealing with all these symptoms and I'm still stuck in a stage of grief and I am miserable, I need to ask for help. I have not come to a place of acceptance. I'm still at a place of blame. I'm critical of everything, including not only others, but myself. I have a spirit of judgment over everybody. And see, that's a sign. I need help. I am not moving on. And sometimes it's hard. Most times it's hard because I have to make a decision. I'm going to live different. Now I need to get the support, the direction, the professional intervention. And there's things that can be done that I can learn how to deal with those overwhelming emotions. The DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is a tool that's oftentimes used to help me manage overwhelming emotions and have what we call emotion regulation. I think there's a forgiveness. There's a rediscovery, and from my vantage point, a rediscovery on who God made me to be, and an understanding that, oh, I can be okay. I am lovable, and I can show love to others. And then I do have a purpose. I suffered a great loss, but I still have a purpose. I still can have a direction. I still can have life goals. All right. Just some thoughts to consider as you look at grief and loss and yes, all the journey that can take you on. But it doesn't need to end in self-destruction. It doesn't need to end in despair. It can end in a place of hope. But hope comes when I build a plan. Usually I need help building that plan. Usually I need somebody to come alongside me. And so I can get back on the right road. If I took a side road and it was pretty bumpy, I can get back on. And I have noticed that I can get emotional strength back, but emotional balance, I can recreate in my life a sense of wellness. Now, I do believe and this is my vantage point, but can be divine intervention in a person's life that begins to change and begins to help us heal and enter in a whole new path and a whole new plan. And I have been doing this work for 40 years because I do see lives change for good.